Hi, everyone. I'm Lexi from Sag Marine, and we're so glad you're here tonight for a landscaper's guide to purchasing and spacing native plants. Tonight, we have a very special guest speaker, our very dear friend, Jeremy Ohmes, who is a professional native plant landscape designer, and he's going to be sharing some amazing tips on selecting plants for your garden, designing your layout, and where to purchase plants from. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to introduce Jeremy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And yes, we have a special guest. You know what we've said in the past, how we're getting into the time where it's time to purchase your native plants, whether you're going to be purchasing them at a local native plant sale or if you're going to be mail ordering, as we've said in previous presentations, you need to order those plants earlier or they will be sold out. So as you're planning your garden now and planning not only what plants you want, but how many plants do you need based on how do you space them? How are you designing with them? So we have a wonderful special guest with us tonight who has been with us before and he's always popular. His name is Jeremy Ohmes, and Jeremy is a Chicago-based gardener who believes gardens can be meaningful spaces for healing and connection. He is the founder of Wild World Gardens, a landscape design company focused on native plants, pollinator gardens, rain gardens, organic vegetable gardens, and therapeutic horticulture. He believes the most beautiful gardens are the most beneficial gardens, those that create habitat for wildlife, support the health of your local ecosystem, and nurture your well-being as well. Wild World Gardens offers garden design, consultation, installation, and stewardship. Go ahead and put any questions you have during this presentation in the comment section because Jeremy would be happy to take some of your questions. I am going to ask that please like this video. It really does help out our channel, and subscribe to keep up with our latest content. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jeremy Ohmes. Hello, Jeremy.
Hey, Kathy and Lexi. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. We always love it when you join us. You are just a wealth of knowledge, experience, and kind of fun once in a while too.
Sometimes. We'll see. Um, yeah, and you all, Sagmarain, are doing such great work. It's always a pleasure. You are so important, I feel like, to the native plant ecosystem in and around Chicago. Uh, the work you do out and about and just having this, these educational resources that you've put together. Your YouTube channel is just a treasure trove. And, you're not just putting out content, which is, I usually go on YouTube for like cat videos and, Rube Goldberg machine things. And you're actually putting out educational, resources and information about native plants, which is amazing. So
Thank
thanks
you
for doing
so much. We love doing it. I mean, there's nothing we'd rather be talking about, right, Lexi?
That's right. All plants all the time.
all the time. Yeah, I like that. It's a good bumper sticker.
All plants, all native
All
plants
the
all the
time.
time.
So my presentation isn't going to be super duper long. I don't think. We'll see. I also tend to ramble. So we're going to be talking about purchasing and spacing native plants. I'll kind of give you a breakdown of first I'm going to talk about who I am and my business, and then kind of just as a background, go into why we do this work, why we're trying to encourage and incorporate these native plants into our landscaping. It's always a good reminder to think of the why and the importance of these plants, and then kind of go into some considerations when you're designing a site for a native plant garden, and then we're gonna go through a little design, talk about the plants, sizes, spacing, and where to get them. So that's kind of general agenda. All right. Um, so I'm Jeremy. My company is Wild World Gardens. I've been doing this really since, I guess, 2018, but officially since 2021. So I'm based in Chicago on the Northwest side. You know, was always kind of a vegetable gardener and then started to incorporate more and more native plants into my garden. I got a certificate at the Chicago Botanic Garden in horticultural therapy, which I think is, for me, is an important part of this work. It's, you know, it's therapeutic healing work. And then I also have a Master Gardener certification. I've worked with patients at Schwab Rehab Center and students at Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, so part of that horticultural therapy aspect. Started Wild World Gardens in 2019. Actually, I got to thank People's Gas for getting sort of turning me onto this, because they ripped out my front yard to fix utility lines, gas line, and then I had an empty slate, and I was like, well, I'm not just going to put turf grass back in here. I'm going to put a bunch of native plants. So then I bought a bunch, and that's how I got started, really. Um, so shout out to People's Gas. So, and then, you know, friends, neighbors started asking and inquiring. So I started helping people in the neighborhood transform their landscapes, and then it just sort of snowballed from there. So Wild World Gardens focus on native plant gardens, pollinator gardens, rain gardens, veggie gardens, therapeutic horticulture. We've co-created more than 100 native plant gardens all across Chicago, backyards, front yards, parkways, help people with containers like on balconies. Um, you name it, we'll do it. So Wild World Gardens offers garden design, consultation, installation, and stewardship. Here's some of our gardens in various phases. A couple backyard gardens, full sun, sort of prairie on the left. That was just like right after planting. It's much more filled in now. And shade garden on the right. It's pretty large backyards for Chicago standards. And then we do a lot of parkways, sort of that hell strip between the sidewalk and, you know, street, which is always neglected, and it's your responsibility to take care of as a homeowner, and you know, so it's always nice to create habitat with that and do something better than just sad turf grass. Um, we kind of come at this work from three different angles, or three different pillars, I guess, or core values that inform what we do. So always thinking about habitat, you know, planting native plants for pollinators and contributing to the local ecosystem. That's super important. I'm sure that's why most of us are interested in this, thinking about those pollinators and how to feed and shelter the birds, bees, moths, wasps, butterflies, caterpillars, et cetera, et cetera. Also thinking about health, you know, the health of our soil, the health of our water, the health of our air, all of which native plants really help with. I know I'm preaching to the choir probably, but yeah, I just think it's important to, you know, sort of remind ourselves. And then part of this that we maybe don't think about is just sort of the healing aspect. You know, from my horticultural therapy background, this work truly is healing work. We're, you know, healing these wounded landscapes that have been disturbed for generations, and you know, now we're trying to get back to what was once there to some degree. But while we're doing that, we're healing, you know, the local wildlife and the pollinators and birds and the creatures around us, and in turn healing ourselves, deepening our connection and our care, you know, with nature and with the landscape. And you know, sort of, I'm really influenced by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, and she has a new book out called The Service Berry. She talks about mutual flourishing. So this is really a mutual flourishing for us and the earth and the wildlife around us, this work. So thinking about why native plants, you know, I'm kind of going a little bit deeper into what I was just saying. You know, you probably have seen this image of native plant roots compared to turf grass. Turf grass roots only going down a couple inches, whereas you have these native plant roots that stretch and mingle way down into the soil. And they're doing that. While they're doing that, they're enriching the soil, they're feeding the microbes. Those roots are decomposing and regenerating. So feeding microbes, the microorganisms, they're improving our clay soil's permeability and controlling erosion, you know, stabilizing soil as well. Turf grass is really not much better than, you know, a paved surface as far as doing a lot of that stuff. So native plants really make a difference to our soil. They make a huge difference to our air health as well. They remove harmful contaminants from the air, water, and soil. They also remove carbon from the air much more effectively than turf grass. And then, they sequester that into the soil. Water health, you talk about rain gardens, and, those deep roots that the native plants have, they really help absorb and filter water. They really help remove pollutants before they enter the waterways. They keep the water in the ground instead of running off into our storm drains and, adding pressure to the storm systems, the storm drain systems, and our waterways. They slow down runoff and they reduce floodwater and stormwater impacts. So important. And then, kind of going back to that habitat aspect, really the most important part, I think, is, the fact that this is all about pollinators, pollinators, pollinators. Just like humans, pollinators need food, water, shelter, and space to survive. Native plants provide this habitat and support the needs of butterflies, birds, bees, beetles, moths, flies, wasps, hummingbirds, and other species. These animals have co-evolved with these plants. The relationship between plants and pollinators is complex, intricate, interconnected, and interdependent. Beautiful dance of symbiosis, and the disappearance of one can signal the extinction of the other. So they have co-evolved and really, are reliant on these plants, and it's a symbiotic relationship. Here's some examples of our local native pollinators on our local native plants. I'm going to take a sip of water real fast while you kind of look at that. Won't go through all of these, but yeah, bumblebees, leafcutter bees, carpenter bees, swallowtail butterflies, the endangered rusty patch bumblebee, hummingbirds, hoverflies, hummingbird moths, monarch caterpillars, all amazing insects and creatures that we really depend on for the web of life and for the food chain. And native plants, feed and shelter them. So very important that we continue to provide refuge and sanctuary and a home for these insects and these creatures. Many of these species are suffering and their populations are declining due to climate change, pesticide use, disease, and habitat loss. And really what we really need to do more is we need to create habitat. I know Doug Ptolemy talks about this a lot. He's a wonderful native plant advocate and entomologist. He talks about all the parcels of residential land we have in the United States, and imagine all of us coming together, to devote some of that to native plants and restoring these lost biomes. He has this wonderful book called Bringing Nature Home. Highly recommend it. If you haven't read it, add it to your library. Check it out from the library. He talks about garden as though life depends on it. We can't just garden for ourselves anymore. We have to garden for other species and create, these life supporting systems. Okay, so that's my spiel about why we should be doing this. So let's get into the how. So, you're thinking about creating a native plant garden. And so there's a lot to research and consider. And I just kind of want to give you sort of, I guess, a top 6 ideas or considerations to really think about when you're, designing your garden. Number 1, get to know your site and its conditions. Obviously, where are you going to put this garden? This will help determine what kind of native plants you need. How much sun is there? What kind of soil? We tend to have, clay soil in and around Chicago for the most part. How wet or dry does the area get? Will it be exposed to salt, harsh winds, foot traffic, dog pee? We do a lot of parkway stuff, and those are all sort of.
Can I just ask, Jeremy, are there plants that can stand up to dog urine? Like even if it's in somebody's backyard that has a male dog,
Right.
Are there plants that do hold up to that better than others?
I mean, I think
I'm asking for myself.
yeah, I know. We plant a lot of like sedges and grasses and parkways that tend to and densely plant them, and they tend to hold up better. But we also try to create sort of diversions and decoys for the dogs as much as possible. So putting in elements like a rock, like a pea rock,
Oh, I
or
like that.
creating like a border along maybe a rock border, gravel border on the front of the garden, to kind of give them an area, like a little doggy spot, is really helpful. So
I
the
like
plants
that.
aren't just constantly being urinated on. so so yeah. And then I feel like if you have signage and it seems intentional and designed, you're kind of hoping people will respect that and not just let their dogs trash it. Doesn't always happen, but dogs will be dogs. But yeah, that's the hope. So, but yeah, think about like all these elements that what the flow of the space. Um, you know, how do you want to like go through your garden if you need to? Accessibility, things like that. Um, yeah, all considerations when initially thinking about a native plant garden design. Another one, number two, is really to think simple diversity. I honestly made this mistake, or I didn't really do this with my first few gardens, my home garden included. I kind of put one of everything, and I was just like, all right, I want it to be as diverse as possible. I'm gonna like plant 50 different species in this, you know, 200 square foot little front yard. Um, and it just was crazy and totally out of control and not exactly you know didn't seem as intentional or designed as I would have liked to have seen. So you want a mixture of plant species but not necessarily one of everything. Vary colors, textures, and structures. um, I would say like start simple and you could always add more. So even if you only have maybe like 5 or 6 species, that's totally fine depending on the size of your garden. Start simply, and then like I said, you can always add more and always expand that plant palette. Um, but it is important to vary some colors and textures and structures, because different pollinator species may be more or less inclined to visit, for example, like a bell-shaped flower on the penstemon up in the left there, the top, over a flat disc-shaped flower like a butterfly weed, and vice versa. Consider another consideration for native plant garden design is to plant in groups. So groupings of individual species look better aesthetically usually. Um, so it kind of shows that intention. Sometimes they are called masses or drifts. So like little clusters, usually odd numbered, so 3, 5, 7, 9 plants together, depending on your space. Just kind of guides the eye and creates this rhythm to the design. And the other thing is, it also makes it easier for pollinators to find the flowers in the landscape, especially in small urban habitats. Kind of think of it like when you go to the grocery store and your green peppers aren't completely on the other side of the store from the red peppers, like they're together, because it makes it easier to find. So pollinators, same idea. Plant, this is super important. We want to garden for all seasons, so plant for different bloom times. This really ensures visual interest across the seasons. But more importantly, it's vital that the flowers are available to pollinators throughout their activity season. There are early pollinators in spring, there's summer pollinators, and then there's pollinators for fall who are, really fueling up, especially like monarchs for that big migration. So spring and fall are especially important to you know, feed and fuel the pollinators, the bees and butterflies. So here's, if you had to like just plant 3 plants in your garden, you would probably consider something for spring, something for summer, and something for fall. So there's, something available not only for your eye, but also for the wildlife in each season. And don't forget winter seed heads and nesting material. A lot of these plants have really lovely, beautiful winter interest, or, you know, I think the better way to describe that is they're still feeding and providing habitat for wildlife and for pollinators, you know, or for insects over the winter. And it just so happens that a side benefit, another perk, is that it looks cool, you know, in the winter. So purple coneflower in the bottom right there with the sort of frosted seed heads looks really amazing, you know, in the winter, as opposed to just being chopped down and nothing there. This is much more interesting. And the goldfinches will go crazy for those seeds. So you're feeding those birds. So think about all the seasons. Another one you all maybe have seen this graphic, but this is from Planting in a Post Wild World, which is a great native plant naturalistic gardening book by Claudia West and Thomas Rainier. So, you know, as we're designing these gardens, you really, I recommend that you think vertically and to think in layers. So you have your structural layer, which is sort of, you know, your taller, bigger plants. There's sort of your focal points, your trees, your shrubs, your tall forbs. They're providing that top canopy. You have your seasonal theme layer, which are mostly your flowering plants. You know, the ones that are blooming, and then, you know, successionally spring, summer, fall. So those are your forbs, and then your ground cover layer, which is kind of your living mulch, and sort of knitting it all together. This like tapestry at the bottom of grasses, sedges, ground covers. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're all short ground covers. You know, a lot of these grasses could be part of a ground cover layer, that are a little bit taller. But yeah, think about it from sort of all those perspectives of the layers, top, middle, and below. And then also don't forget your spring ephemerals, which are some of our earliest blooming native plants in early spring. They often die back during the heat of the summer. But, you know, we have long winters here in Chicago, and, you know, any little pop of color that we can get, you know, in early spring after that long winter is such a relief and such a salve for the soul. So, and also that's food for those early pollinators I was talking about. The spring ephemerals are very important if you can, yeah, if you decide to put them in. And then this is what I'm really going to be talking a lot about, sort of those last two slides through the rest of this, is thinking about layers and then thinking about spacing and density. So I think one thing that is really important is to try to plant as densely as possible. I am kind of the no bare ground mindset. Um, so, you know, you have a planting up in the top there, which is just so packed with vibrancy and life and color and texture and structure and color. I already said color twice, but yes, even more color and food and habitat. And then you have a planting down in the right here, which is just nothing but a sea of wood mulch. And, you know, nature abhors a vacuum. I mean, that's just asking for tons of weeds right there at some point. And, you know, no plant evolved growing in wood mulch, 2 feet of wood mulch. You don't see that in your woodlands or in your prairies or savannas. So what we're trying to do is really mimic those natural plant communities, which are densely packed. The more plants you have, the fewer weeds you'll have eventually once they're grown in and established, and the less need you will need less mulch, or you will reduce the need for mulch. The more plants you have will protect the soil and provide more habitat on the ground. They'll retain moisture, and they'll really help with drought tolerance. We kind of had that drought last year for a few months, and, you know, I got a densely planted front yard, and I didn't have to water my front yard native plant garden once. during that drought. It's just keeps on going, keeps on thriving. It also, the more plants you have, that builds a seed bank, and it encourages root competition. So not only thinking above ground, but below ground, that root competition is really important for the plants to sort of mingle and connect and sort of fight it out a little bit, which leads to less flopping, really, and happier plants. Can't pamper these things. We gotta definitely pack them in. So let's talk about a couple different garden styles now that we have some design tips in mind. These are sort of traditional, I guess, naturalistic garden styles that you'll see. One is block planting, which is sort of a more formal, organized, and intentional look. I believe that's a Piet Oldoof garden in the top there. And he's a big proponent of block planting. And that's where you have large masses or blocks of the same species sort of planted and repeated throughout the garden to create this rhythm and unity. Lurie Garden is a bit of this, and it it really stops you in your tracks as you're looking at, whoa, it's like, whoa, look at this giant mass of purple coneflower back there. And you've got the blazing star just shooting up in the front, this group, this mass of that. And so it provides this like just show stopping, you know, just aesthetic. It also is really important for the pollinators too. They can seek out their food, in these blocks and these masses of plants. But so this would be more of a kind of a more formal, organized, intentional look. Then there's the matrix planting, which sort of more so mimics kind of our I guess natural plant communities, and that's more organic, more natural, a little more whimsical. Don't say messy. It's definitely not messy. It's definitely designed and intentional. But it creates this dense tapestry or matrix of one or two plants. So usually that ground cover living mulch layer, which is usually grasses or sedges, planted throughout, and then you have these drifts of flowering plants interspersed throughout, sort of woven throughout the tapestry. And that draws the eye like kind of across the landscape. And that matrix of grasses and sedges really holds a lot of structure, especially in the winter when the ornamental value kind of fades. And so you still have a lot to look at there as the grasses, are going to seed or, kind of going dormant. Yeah. So, and then what I kind of tend to recommend is somewhat of a mix of these, honestly. I don't think one is better than the other. They both have their pros and cons. But the design that we're going to be kind of working through is somewhat of a mix of these. And
Jeremy, can I ask, do you, like, if somebody has a pretty small area that they're going to work with,
yeah.
for these smaller landscapes, can both of these garden styles work in a very small landscape?
Oh, absolutely, for sure.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah, and then honestly, if uh, one way to do it, really kind of for both of these, if you break it down to a smaller, sort of modular component, a smaller landscape, or a smaller design, then you can kind of repeat these throughout the landscape if you want. So you don't have to think about designing for this gigantic space. So you have 1,000 square feet. Well, I'm going to break it down to just 200 square foot, and then repeat that 5 times, modularly throughout the space.
That'd be, and the symmetry would probably be something that would appeal to neighbors too, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah, definitely. Um, and really, I gotta. Well, we'll get into this, but I think it's easier to achieve these styles and this effect if you're planting um, plugs or pints. It's harder if you're seeding because there's just an inherent, sort of wildness and a mix in seeding, that's or sort of a unpredictability or less of control, right? And so, yeah, if you're planting actual plants, it's easier to sort of get to these styles. So we're gonna kind of walk through a design. It's I pretty simple, but it's we're gonna I like to design on graph paper for sort of at least like the initial ideas, and that's kind of what we're gonna do here. This is just a 10 by 20 area, so 10 each block of the graph represents 1 foot. So 10 up, 20 across, 200 square feet. Um, Looking at probably, we're going to say this is like a full partial sun area. So somewhat prairie savanna. We're going to say the soil is medium clay, which is pretty standard in Chicagoland. And we're going to try to design sort of a dense mixed planting, taking inspiration from block and matrix a little bit, with a focus on layering and spacing. And we're going to use plugs, and I'll talk more about plugs in a bit later, and sort of the benefits of going that route. And planting most of our plants 12 inches, so 1 foot on center. So from the center of one plant to the center of the next plant, it's 1 foot, except for trees, shrubs, and some of the larger forbs. So really densely packed in here. Okay, so first we're gonna kind of approach it from that layer aspect. So first we're thinking about that structural layer. I always encourage people, if they can, plant a tree, preferably an oak. If you don't have enough space for an oak, there's plenty of understory trees, native understory trees, smaller trees for urban landscapes that are wonderful. But all of them are amazing host plants. And yeah, and it's just, I think it's very important to add to our tree canopy here, in the city, in this region, in this country. So structural layer trees, these are, the focal points they'll draw on the eye. Most importantly, provide loads of food and habitat for wildlife and pollinators, tallest plants in the design. So we're gonna do a serviceberry. On this page, there's a serviceberry on the left, red bud in the middle, and what is that? Hornbeam, musclewood on the right there. So we're gonna do a serviceberry. Really great tree. This one in particular is the Allegheny serviceberry, Amelanchier laevis. And so, they tend to get about 15 to 20 feet tall by 15 feet wide. We're going to put that just like right in the middle of this garden design, just to make it simple. So the serviceberries there planted right in the middle. Dug a hole, twice as wide, twice as deep, and put it in there. We got to think about like how wide the trunk is going to be, diameter. So I'm just saying 2 feet wide. Serviceberries tend to be multi-stem. You can buy single stem ones, but they tend to be multi-stem when you get them. So it'll probably be wider than that, but we're just going to go with 2 foot wide for now, multi-stem base. So that's right there in the middle. Okay. So as I go through this, I'm gonna talk about sort of sizes of these plants and where to purchase them as we go through each layer. So when you think about trees, what size tree should I get? First, you got to think about how they're sold. Consider what you're buying. So trees are sold usually as bare root, balled and burlapped, or in containers. You have all three varieties right there. There are different sizes for each one, but usually the bigger the tree, the more mature it is, and often the more expensive it is, right? The bigger the tree you get. Bare root trees, these are usually grown in a field, dug out of the ground with the soil shaken off, and only sold for the most part during the dormant season. They're cheap, but usually smaller. and they need to be planted as soon as possible, or sort of tended to and minded to until they can be planted. Otherwise, the roots dry out. I know Prairie Moon Nursery sells and ships bare root trees and shrubs. There used to be I don't know if he still is around, like Root Canopies and Trees, I believe was his company. I don't know, on the south side, but they tend to be pretty small, 6 inches to a foot, maybe 2 feet tall, for bare root trees. So maybe not the best thing if you're trying to establish something right away. Balled and burlapped trees. You often see these in your tree nurseries. So these are field grown. They're dug out of the ground with the ball of soil around the roots, and then they're wrapped with wire and burlap. They come in many sizes, but are usually measured by caliper, which is the diameter of the trunk, and they're heavier because of the root ball. You can find them at most big tree nurseries and some garden centers. Let me talk about balled and burlap because they tend to be pretty big for the most part. So because of their size and weight, balled and burlap trees often require more effort to be properly planted, I've found. I have a very small crew. We don't have a bunch of heavy equipment. And so we tend to not plant these trees. And for the average homeowner, unless you're hiring a landscaper who has the equipment and the crew, if you're trying to DIY it, do it yourself, then balled and burlap is, I don't know, it's a pretty hefty tree most of the time. So here's just some examples of the weight of these things. A 2 and 2.5 inch caliper or diameter tree trunk can weigh 400 pounds. That's, and then if you look at the height, 6 to 7 foot tree, 400 pounds, 24-inch root ball size, all the way up to really big and really heavy. So, I think municipalities, plant these a lot, businesses. If you got the big tools to do it, then you can do it. But it's not my favorite thing to do. The roots are severed when they're dug out of the ground, so they are more likely to experience stress and transplant shock, which sometimes results in slower growth. So there's that sort of downside as well. This is something I found through University of Minnesota Extension, talking about sort of the advantages of planting young trees, smaller and younger trees. I won't read this whole thing, but just the top. It is not uncommon for those seeking to add to their landscape to ask how big are your trees, which is usually a question in regard to a tree's height or caliper, trunk diameter. Given what is often perceived to be the slow growth rate of trees, the temptation for instant gratification by planting as large a tree as possible, often via the balled and burlap method, is understandable. However, research shows that older, larger trees that have been transplanted require significantly more time to reestablish their pre-transplant growth rates. The vigorous root system of a young tree will enable branch and canopy growth sooner, helping you see progress toward your landscape goals almost immediately. So there's that, which leads me to my favorite trees to purchase and plant are container grown trees. They have their entire root system intact. They tend to establish much more quickly, not skipping a beat when planted because they experience much less transplant shock as opposed to being dug out of the ground, roots severed and put elsewhere. And they can also be shipped nearly year round. Most importantly, container grown trees are much lighter and easier to handle than balled and burlap trees. I have found that they do require some extra watering in the first few months of planting because the limited soil volume tends to dry out faster. But look at that, you're getting a 6 to 8 foot tree, which balled and burlap could weigh 400 pounds, and here it's 25 to 35 pounds, or 8 foot to 10 foot tree in a 15-gallon, 35 to 50 pounds. So much lighter and easier.
So Jerry, why are they so much lighter if they're the same height? Is it just they've developed less roots?
Yeah, it's that root ball, and you're not carrying all that soil with it, and extra weight. So, and the there's just less soil volume.
Okay.
So yeah, just much easier for the homeowner and for the small landscaping crew to handle.
What a difference.
Yeah, and so I know Possibility Place sells container grown trees in 1, 5, 10, and 15 gallons. Um, some tree, tree nurseries do. I believe Kankakee Tree Nursery does. There's some other places, but yeah, when if I have the option to get a container grown tree, that's what I always go for.
The Sagmarine 2025 native plant sale does too.
Oh, well, there you go. I didn't know you're offering trees.
Trees and
Perfect.
shrubs, yes, we are. In
Wonderful.
containers, 3 to 15 gallon.
Perfect. Yeah, grab one. So then moving down to the next layer, we're talking about shrubs, or I guess this is still the same layer, the structural layer, but we're going to put some shrubs in this design. So drawing your eye down one level, providing loads of food and habitat for birds and pollinators. Here on this page, we've got a hazelnut, American hazelnut. We've got a spice bush in the middle. And then this technically isn't a shrub, white wild indigo, but it acts like one. It's shrub-like. So I kind of group it in with shrub because of its height and width and you know, sort of character. And so that's what we're going to use for this design. We're going to put 2 white wild indigos, Baptisia albas in here. 5 feet tall, 3 feet wide. So we're going to plant those, a couple of those, into our 200 square foot garden. So we've got so far we've got our structural layer now. We've got our serviceberry tree, and we've got a couple wild indigo shrub like plants. Native shrub sizes. So these will be sold at the Sagmarine plant sale. So I do mention it in this slide. Most native shrubs are grown and sold in 1, 3, 5, and 7 gallon containers. That actually, you can't think of it like milk jugs. They're not actually 7 gallons. It's just sort of an estimate, but that's just the container size. So once again, the bigger the container, the more mature and more expensive the plant. Possibility Place sells container grown trees in 1 and 5 gallons, and of course, you can get shrubs from the Sagmarine native plant sale. Okay, moving a layer down now. Now we're in our seasonal layer. So these are the flowering plants. These are sort of, are the stars of the show here. These plants, most often forbs, provide the pop and visual interest throughout the garden. They offer a succession of colorful blooms throughout the seasons, which means food and habitat for birds and pollinators. So we are going to put in our seasonal plants now into this design, our flowering plants, our forbs. I've picked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 species and kind of went through them by order of bloom time. So we planted some wild columbine, scattered those throughout. Those are a little bit shorter, so I kind of put them closer to the edge. Those will be one of the first things that bloom. And I group most of these in groups of 3 or 5, I think, for the most part, just to kind of create these masses and these clusters throughout the planting. So we've got some wild columbine. Those are each I've spaced them to where each plant takes up 1 foot square. So these are 12 inches on center. So you're planting them 1 foot apart, except for the goldenrod and the aster, and I'll talk about that. But we've got wild columbine in here. We've planted some eastern bee balm, a little bit shorter as well. So putting those sort of towards the edges where they'll be seen, by passersby. Got a really nice plant with lovely foliage, the prairie alum root, which is in the Heuchera family, coral bells family. So that we've planted those throughout, kind of adding some different texture and foliage in there. We've planted some smooth penstemon in groups of 3. Those are close. Some are close to the edge. Some of them are put more inward there. So there's 3 spots, or no, sorry, 4 spots for those. We've got a really awesome plant, butterfly milkweed, which tends to sort of, since it has a taproot, tends to really like to be isolated a little bit. And so we planted 2 of those in 4 different spots. And I really like butterfly milkweed as like a border edge plant, just because of that sort of fine needly texture, and then just the striking orange. It looks really nice with the grasses around it. And it can handle that edge pretty well because it tends to be a little bit drier on the edge. So, and then we have some purple coneflower. Those are massed. There's 2 groups of those, planted 5 at a time. So we have 10 altogether. Then we have, kind of getting into summer. We're already into summer. Summer leading into fall, we have some showy black-eyed Susan. So we have groups of those, scattered throughout, groups of 3. So 6 groups of 3 is 18 of those. Then we have our goldenrod and aster. And these, really lovely plants that bloom together around the same time in the fall, kind of, peanut butter and jelly. They go together super well. Goldenrod and aster, the colors complement each other. Those late season pollinators really rely on them. They depend on them for fuel and food. And they tend to be a little bit bigger. Most of these other plants, they don't vary that much in size. The columbine might be a little bit smaller, but for the most part, I'm going to say that they're, should be planted 12 inches apart. The goldenrod and aster, those will get a little bit bigger, a little bit wider. So we're going to plant those, with 2 feet in mind here. So those will take up a little more space, and we have fewer of those. So we just have two goldenrod and 2 aster kind of dotted in there, and not so much clustered or grouped, but just adding them as individual sort of dots to the planting. All right, so we have lots of seasonality there. We're gonna have lots of blooms and lots of color and lots of structure in our seasonal layer. Now we're moving all the way down to the ground cover layer. So this is, could be the first layer you think about or last layer you think about. It doesn't matter. But, definitely something that you should consider and think about. So these are your grasses, sedges, and other ground covers. So these plants, usually grasses or sedges, create, like I said before, the sort of living mulch that retains moisture, suppresses weeds, and provides structure above ground and root competition for those other flowering plants below ground. So these you really want to pack in between all those other plants to provide that competition and that structure and that value. Also tons of ecosystem value as well for these plants. And don't forget about your spring ephemerals. These are, like I said, are the earliest to bloom in spring, providing crucial food for early pollinators, and they typically die back in the heat of summer. So we have Virginia bluebells on the left, shooting star in the middle, bellwort on the right. So we're going to incorporate these grasses, sedges, and ephemerals as the last part of this design. And so they are kind of filling, going back to this, filling in all those spaces that are empty, all those squares. So we're mostly using prairie drop seed. It's a plant that I like to use in parkways. It's very tolerant of a lot of stuff that we were talking about, salts and other things. Has a nice clumping form, and obviously has a wonderful fragrance as it goes to seed. So we're gonna really go big and dense on the prairie drop seed throughout this entire garden, filling those in between all of the other, flowers, shrubs, and tree. And then kind of around the base of the tree, we're just going to do, because, might be a little bit shadier there under a tree canopy, as we're going to put in some sedges there, which also, kind of a similar clumping shape. We're specifically going to do common oak sedge, just 8 of those around that serviceberry. And then we're also going to throw in just some Virginia bluebells around the base of that service berry as well, just to get that early spring pop. Notice that the planting is right up to the base of the tree. So we too often see trees that just have nothing around the bottom of them, which is not how nature works. So we really want to fill that in, and what that does is that provides something. Well, it kind of helps the tree, but also provides something called a soft landing, or a place for food and shelter for insects, like butterflies, moths, and bees, who are using that tree as a host plant. And they have a nice soft place to fall potentially. So here is a good example of a soft landing that's planted right around the base of this tree. You have the Solomon seal, wild geranium, some ferns in there. So yeah, really important. Plant around your trees. So here's our final design. Pretty basic, but pretty packed in there. 200 square feet, one tree, two shrubs or shrub-like plants, which are the white wild indigo, 95 flowering plants, 67 prairie drop seed grasses, 8 sedges, and 8 ephemerals. So we got 181 total plants in this 200 square foot garden. Super packed. So got this design. So now how am I going to plant all this? Well, first let's look at the plant palette, what it actually looks like beyond just colored squares or colored circles on a graph. So here's what the blooms will look like for these plants. You have bluebells, columbine, bee balm, prairie alum root, penstemon, butterfly milkweed, the white wild indigo, purple coneflower, showy black-eyed Susan, showy goldenrod, and aromatic aster. Just a variety of colors, textures, blooms, food and habitat from spring through fall. And what I often like to do is, this is just a quick sort of sketch, or, jot notes of like, okay, when do these plants bloom? When is their active bloom time? And, from spring into summer, summer into, into fall into winter. And then the dotted line is sort of when the winter interest for a lot of these plants is happening. And most of these plants have really wonderful winter interest. Bee balm, penstemon, the seed heads are incredible. Purple coneflowers we talked about, goldenrod and aster. So yeah, I think it's helpful just to sort of show, like, think about or write down and show to yourself, like, okay, do I have all my seasons covered? This is a good way to do that, just quickly and simply. So we're going to talk about, real quick, sizes of native forbs grasses and ground covers, and why I'm going to advocate for smaller. Not bigger is not always better. So most of the non-woody native plants are sold in plugs, pints, quarts, or as 1 gallon. As always, the bigger the size, the more expensive the plant. We highly recommend trying to find your plants in plugs and pints if you can, especially if you need a lot of one species. So for example, all that prairie drop seed. If you only have a few of one species, then sure, go for that gallon. If you only have a couple butterfly milkweeds, or, if you only need 5 penstemon or something. But I've noticed a lot of places, places online, you can actually order sort of a mix of flowering species in plugs, which is a really awesome thing to do. So you're still getting bang for your buck with the plugs, easier to plant, but you're also getting your flower mix. So maybe I can order, like, for example, I'm going to go back here, a mix of the columbine and the bee balm and the alum root in a flat of plugs, and the penstemon and milkweed and coneflower in another flat of plugs. So why plugs and pints? Well, plugs and pints, they really do give you more bang for your buck, for sure. Here's a prairie smoke plug on the right here. They're much cheaper, around 110, $150 for a flat of 38 plugs. There are some places that sell 50 flat or 50 plugs in a flat. So that equals about $3 a plant, which is a great deal. And if you go up to pints, that's probably more like $7 a plant, $7 to $10 a plant. And if you go up to gallons, then you're talking about $20, sometimes $30 a plant. So that adds up fast. And so, especially if you can mix and match your flowering plants in a plug tray, it is so worth it. So that's number one, cheaper, more bang for your buck. Number two, they're easier to plant, easier on just your body and your state of mind, especially around trees, and you can plant more of them. Highly recommend if you're using plugs and pints to try to find, I don't have a picture of this, but try to get yourself an auger, a plant auger, which looks like it's just like a drill that you can attach to a battery powered drill or an electric drill, and you can, drill into the ground your planting holes, which are perfect for plug size, and you can just pop and drop them in. So much easier to plant. They have super healthy root systems, which means they'll adapt quickly, and honestly, they'll catch up to the gallon-sized plants in no time, like by the following season. And so they'll grow up together beautifully and blend together in a more natural way, as opposed to more mature plants that can look more like a collection instead of a community. So I think there's a lot of benefits to plugs and pints. Unfortunately, it's often hard to find these at retail garden centers. I would suggest that you ask your garden centers, tell them to stock more plugs and pints. As long as if the demand is there and enough people ask for it, they know they're going to make money off it, and hopefully they'll stock it more. So, but for now, you can definitely order them online. Possibility Place, which is one of our best local native plant nurseries in the Chicago lands area. And Prairie Nursery and Prairie Moon Nursery, they all ship and sell and ship plugs and pints. And you can find them at local native plant sales, like the Sagmarain Native Plant Sale. I encourage you to hit up your plant sales. And I'll have a slide on that in a little bit. So here is a parkway garden we planted with mostly plugs. There's I believe some gallon in there, but for the most part, it's plugs, other than that shrub and a few other things. We planted in May 2023. 4 months later, by that fall, really filled in super fast. These are, like I said, mostly plugs, 4 months later. And then by the next spring, like, look how huge these plants are. Like, this is a year later, all plugs. Well, for the most part, mostly plugs. The columbine going out of control. I don't know if anyone else had this last year, but I feel like columbine was just like going nuts last year. It was so tall everywhere in a lot of our gardens. The alum root in the front there, really beautiful foliage. So this is obviously in spring when those things are blooming, but yeah, so there you go. A year later.
I love this example, Jeremy, just because it's such a small space. You can see that that's on a city street,
Yep.
on a parkway where people don't have much, front yard space at all. And look at how much you can do with just that small space. It's just absolutely stunning. Your design and your incorporation of the bricks is just really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. We always try to and I encourage you to do this as well. Another design consideration, just create ways for you to immerse yourself in your garden. So paths, benches, sculptural elements, anyway. Obviously this client's child She loves to walk through this garden. And she, texted me and she's like, "Oh, my daughter, every day we walk home from school, she walks the path through the Parkway Garden." So it's just developing that sense of connection and the sense of place, it's just so important. So, but like I said, yeah, this is plug planted. So I'm always plugging plugs. And then finally, where to source your native plants. Like I mentioned, native plant sales are super important. You're supporting good causes, great organizations, often conservation organizations like Sagmarain, Wild Ones. The Chicago Bird Alliance has a native plant sale up at North Park Nature Center. Open Lands does a big native plant sale in Lake County. In the city, there's a place called Comfort Station, which is sort of an artist space, and they do a big native plant sale to fundraise for the artist space. Possibility Place, I've mentioned a bunch of times, given them a lot of love. Oh, and the other thing about these native plant sales is that they tend to sell the plants in plugs and pints because, they're going to be buying in bulk and they want you to get as much bang for your buck as possible. And then there's garden centers like Christie Weber, Lurvies that sell native plants. I'm not familiar with a lot of them on the southwest, southwest suburbs, but maybe there's others down there. And the good thing about like these native plant sales and Possibility Place in your local garden centers, that or you're pretty sure that the plants that you're sourcing are local eco type plants. So they're grown within a certain radius of where that place is selling, which is super important.
And one thing I want to say is another reason why it's so important to try to go with some of your local native plant sales like Sagmarain. And if you want a complete list of them in your area, whether you're watching from the Chicago area or you're watching from another state, check with your local, your state's your state's native plant society. Most, if not all states have a native plant society. And so if you look up that website, they should have a list of all native plant sales in the area. And if you do purchase from some of these native plant sales that pop up in from different organizations, you can save pretty significantly on shipping.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
also, we had a question on chat too. This attendee had sourced some seeds online and she contacted the company to check to see if they were treated with neonicotinoids. But if you go through your local plant sales or organizations like these, you have that guarantee that they're not treated with the neonicotinoids. And Jeremy, do you want to speak a little bit about why that's so important?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so they're not treated with pesticides that are going to, or that are harming the pollinators where they're grown, but could possibly harm the pollinators and the creatures in your own landscape. So untreated plants, super important. And like you said, I know that, yeah, native plant sales, the one where they source their plants from, they are not treated with those harmful chemicals.
And we had another question on chat about when you plant your plugs, do you mulch in between them while they're getting established, or does it not matter?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes, we do mulch, and that is really ideally the only time we mulch. So right after installation, right after we plant, just to sort of make sure that there's a weed barrier there while the plants are getting established. It's a couple inches of wood mulch or even leaf mulch. But yeah, but the idea is that because you've planted a lot of plants and pretty densely, that they will eventually shade out the weeds and create their own living mulch, right? Which is how it works in nature.
So when
And
you
for,
speak, oh, go ahead, Lexi.
oh, I was just going to say for the wood mulch, you'd suggest like non-colored, we don't want
Yeah,
treated. We want just like raw wood mulch.
raw wood mulch. Yeah. yeah, don't if you yeah, please don't get the red dyed or black dyed or brown dyed mulch. It's no good. So just find some, I don't know, cedar mulch, or just, yeah, plain as day mulch.
And the leaf mulch, for people who aren't familiar with that, if that's new to them, can you just describe that a little bit more?
Sure. All that is just chopped up leaves. And so good. I like leaf mulch because, it eventually it breaks down a lot faster than the wood mulch, and it's feeding the soil and feeding the in turn feeding the plants around it. Um, and really, I mean, if you think about it, since it is just chopped up leaves, then you could just use your leaves too. So rake up your leaves and use those as mulch around your, if you have extra leaves. I tend to be on the side of leaving the leaves as much as possible, because there's a lot of insects and, sheltering and habitating inhabiting that leaf litter. But if you do have extra leaves that you want to rake up, just use that's free mulch. That's nature's mulch right there, and you can put that in your garden between the plants, and it'll break down and feed things, add nutrients to the soil.
Now, when you were showing your design, you put most of the plants you planted 12 inches on center. And then you said some of the bigger ones you space more. So what are some species that you spaced those 2 foot on center? So other
Yeah.
than the aster and the goldenrod, what are some other species you would do that with?
I mean, I would say like some of the silphiums, so you're like prairie docks and compass plants and cup plants get pretty big. Probably Joe Pye weeds, uh, you know, are a bit bigger. Um, Obedient plant. Um, yeah, I mean, I would, when you're looking at the plant tag and this and the sort of the spacing instructions, I would really err on the side of less is better. Or, go to that lower number. And if you can even space even closer than what it suggests, that's ideal. And
I guess I think people, when people are used to the old, or I shouldn't say the old kind of the kind of landscaping that we've been seeing for the last few decades, where it's plant and mulch and plant and mulch. People are so used to seeing so much space. But
right,
like you said, when we're dealing with these native plants, they actually enjoy being very close with each other.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. They like to rub elbows and just, like a cocktail party, mingling
It's
and
not like we're gonna I mean, I guess that's a whole other topic of, not planting really aggressive plants next to more timid plants. I mean,
right,
that's a
right.
whole other thing that
That's a
maybe
whole
we would like to have Jeremy back for at some point,
that's a whole nother webinar.
That's a whole other.
I didn't get into that, this sort of the sociability of plants. But yes, that is a consideration as well. Um, but I feel like people, what sort of deters them from planting in this style, well, it's like you said, there's just the traditional, plant wood mulch, plant sort of status quo landscaping, but also people tend to be afraid of potential overcrowding. But, these plants, these gardens, the beautiful thing about native plant gardens is that they're not static. They're always changing. They're always dynamic. So, you know, some plants are going to come front and center, while others are going to take a back seat for a while, and, things are going to shift and change. And then if you do get to a point where you notice things are overcrowding and they're, just starting to sort of lean too much on each other or crowd each other out, you can always divide a lot of these plants, dig them up and divide them, and uh, use the other half of the plant for another part of your garden or somewhere else. Give it to a neighbor or friend.
Well,
So
we in one of our other uh, presentations, we decided that neighborhoods need to have like where you divide your plants and then you have um, a wine party where you trade off your divided plants. And this could be a neighborhood thing. Get
yeah,
together and drink wine and trade plants.
this is the kind of this is the good kind of division, right? Like there's
Right.
too much bad division in the world. But
Right.
this is the right division. Yeah. Divide the plants and share them with others.
And when you say the 12 inches on center, is that the same whether you're planting a pint or a plug?
Uh yeah.
And if you were to plant a quart or a gallon, would you give more space or would you pretty much just use the same thing?
I would give a little bit more space. You know, maybe 16 or so, 18 possibly, but I would still pack it in there as much as possible.
Okay. Less weeding, less watering. I'm
Less
all for
weeding,
it.
less watering. Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing definitely a lesson learned as I've done this work is each year I'm like, I need to plant more plants uh, closer together and more densely. Um, just because, well, for our own sort of maintenance and stewardship of the space, but also just for the homeowners, you know, benefit too. So yeah,
And would you talk, is that your last slide, Jeremy?
let me see here. Oh, I've got
There
this
we
one.
go. Perfect. Perfect one for what I'm going to ask you now. Would you give everybody an idea of what what you do, what services you provide, what your service area is?
Sure. So we do design, and our designs are definitely little more intricate than the one I showed you. That was definitely a basic sketch, but we do design, we do installation, um, and we do stewardship. We do maintenance and stewardship of, you know, whether it's a garden that we've installed or if you have an existing native plant garden that needs a little love and a little help and maybe some editing and some TLC. We do that, and we tend to service the, you know, the Chicago area in the city. Some burbs here and there, but you know, there's our mission is definitely like trying to help this urban environment around here and bring native landscaping as much as possible within the city. And then if we can't service your area or if it's too far for us to get to, then we offer remote consultations. So I've done plenty of designs and consults with, you know, people out in say like Yorkville or Frankfurt or, you know, pretty
Mhm.
far away from where I'm located, um, and you know, help them get the plants and either install it themselves or, you know, find a landscaper that can help them install it.
And you could actually remotely like look at pictures or video of their space and get information about their space and create a design based on that?
We have done that. It's not my favorite thing to do. I do like to visit the garden if I can, if it's feasible, just to see that because there's nothing like seeing the space in person, and you know, so, but done some jobs like out of state where that wasn't possible, and yeah, just did it all remotely.
We have a great question on chat. I have a landscaping company and would love to incorporate natives and native design into my business. Is there anywhere I could go to learn how to do that? Thank you guys. I
Oh,
think this
I
also,
love that question. I love
yeah,
that question.
this came up at the
We need
conference we
more
were
of
at
you. We
too.
need more of you.
Yeah, we have to really
Yeah,
innovate in this industry. So yeah, Jeremy,
absolutely. Um, Anywhere I can go to learn how to do that? Well, I would say go to the Sag Moraine YouTube channel. for lots of tips. Uh, the Illinois, I would say join the Illinois Landscaper Contractors Association if this person hasn't already, ILCA, because actually your guest next week, Chris Barron, I believe he's on the board, and him and a few other folks are really doing a lot to sort of uh, turn the landscaping industry in and around Chicago, towards native plant landscaping, or at least get them thinking about that more. So, like last week, there was a big conference for the Illinois Landscape Contractors Association. And I would say probably 10 years ago, there was really not that much information on native plants, or, workshops and things. And now there definitely is. And so it's slowly but surely happening. So that's good. So join that, look into that, and then yeah, contact me if you want, or talk to other native landscaping companies, and we can help. We're all in this together. I just want to see as many of these plants get into people's gardens as possible. So definitely willing to help out anyone who wants to do this work.
The other thing I would do, I mean, this is like, I mean, I can't tell you how many times, we have people say, I want this work done. I just don't have anybody that can do it. So to have more and more landscapers who can do this, who this is just one of their many bags of tricks, that they are familiar enough with these plants to be able to do that. I was also reading recently, and I can't find, sorry, I'm looking on my phone now, but there is I had gotten an email from the Conservation Foundation, which is out in Naperville,
Yep.
and they were having, I think it was a 3-part series of talks. Did
Yep.
you see that, Jeremy?
Yeah, I went to it yesterday actually.
Oh, it's passed?
Well, no, it's 3 different days. So it was yesterday, and then it's going to be next Wednesday and the following Wednesday. Yeah, kind of specifically geared towards that question, like landscaping companies, contractors who are looking to incorporate, more native plants into their work. Thanks for reminding me of that. But yeah, so and I would say it was a mix of landscapers and also just interested, citizens, community members. But it was packed, totally packed, and it was great through the Conservation Foundation.
Yeah, and like Jeremy said, keep watching our channel. We try to bring a lot of these plants um, to you. But the other thing is, landscapers need to be able to source these plants. So there's a lot of connections that need to be made, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I feel like, yeah, the challenges I've encountered is that there are not enough sources, like you were saying, and so getting all the plants that you want or need is still a challenge sometimes. And so, yeah, the more that people can sort of demand this, and those nurseries can grow and build their stock, and the more that garden centers, just retail can offer these as an option, is so important. And that really just comes down to
And
people
if you're
ask.
ever really looking for something, reach out to us. We might be able to help you source it.
Oh,
And
okay. Yeah.
um, and also, um, yeah, I was talking to some people. There was a big convention in Chicago last weekend called the Wild Things Convention. I was talking to some of the native plant growers, and we were talking about how there's kind of I feel almost a disconnect between growers and retailers.
Yeah.
And if the growers would package things in such a way that the retailers think people would be attracted to. So I wish, I'm hoping that there will be more dialogue between those two, so that I think that needs to be done to get more of these plants available through retailers,
Yeah,
through,
absolutely.
through, through traditional retailers.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Um, yeah, that would be great.
And the best place for people to reach you is through your website, wildworldgardens.com,
Absolutely.
or connect with you on Instagram. Well, is that it for the questions, Lexi?
That's it for the questions.
Thank
Cool.
you so much, Jeremy. As usual, this was terrific.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Keep up the good work.
We will, and hopefully you'll join us here again in the not too distant future.
I hope so. Yeah. Love to come back anytime. Um, what's on tap for next week?
Chris.
Perfect. Sounds good. He's got got good things to say, lots of good information. So
He sure does, yes.
all right. Have
Thank
a
you,
good night.
everyone, for joining us. We'll see you in the next one.